Good morning and welcome, everybody. I'm delighted to be here with you all today. My name is Randy Melzi, and I'm a Vice President of Public Policy Programs and Corporate Relations at the Americas Society Council of the Americas. It is my pleasure to welcome you to today's program, Global Energy Crisis, the Outlook for Latin America. The panel is on the record and is being recorded. You can watch it again on our website if you miss anything or if you want to share with friends and colleagues. This program brings together senior policymakers and private business leaders from Latin America for a forward-looking and insightful discussion on the future of energy markets in our region amidst a spike in prices, supply shortages, and the ongoing energy transition. Our panel consists of Jaime Caballero, CFO of Ecopetrol Group, Alejandro Lew, CFO of YPF, Dr. Luisa Palacios, Senior Research Scholar at SIPA's Center on Global Energy Policy at Columbia University, and Dr. Lourdes Melgar, non-resident fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute Center for Energy. The panel will be moderated by Nina Almeida, Senior Vice President at Moody's Investor Service. We encourage the audience to participate actively in the discussion by using the chat feature to send questions and comments. At the end of the panel, time permitting, Nina may ask the panelists questions from the chat. Last but not least, a special thank you to today's sponsor, Chevron. I now turn it over to Nina. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Wendy. It was a very nice introduction. Thank you. And it's a privilege for me to moderate today such a high-profile panel on such a critical matter like energy. The energy markets have always been sensitive to supply, demand, geopolitics to start, but prices have become even more volatile in the last 5 years, regardless of the pandemic, because of climate change and an increasing scrutiny regarding environmental, social, and governance from regulators, investors, rating agencies, and also from people everywhere in the world. So these conditions have affected the way market constituents make financial and long-term capital investment decisions, which affect operating costs, supply, demand, and again, energy prices. We at Moody's believe that oil and gas producers in Latin America will maintain investment and financial discipline, even if they see the opportunity to increase business activity. Oil and gas companies will also start investing more and more in low carbon businesses to strengthen their resilience. But now let's start our discussion and see what our panelists think about the challenges they are experiencing or witnessing. So I start today by asking you, Luisa, to share with us your views about Latin America and the energy metrics that we have in the region and the impact of climate change on the region's energy access. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Nimia. And thank you, Council of the Americas. It is really an honor and a pleasure to be here among such distinguished speakers. I think the title of the event is very telling, right? So we're talking about the impact of the global energy crisis in Latin America. And I think this is the right place to start because although Latin America did not generate, it is not responsible for what happened, it is being impacted by a global pretty much natural gas spike in prices, which to me underscores not only what you were saying at the beginning, Nimia, which is the volatility of energy markets, but the interconnectedness of energy markets, because we normally talk about oil prices, and yes, oil prices are part of what's going on in energy markets, but this is a crisis of the natural gas market. And so it kind of, I think, underscores also the global nature now of natural gas markets. You were also mentioning the issue of climate change in this discussion, because while yes, there are issues about the energy transition, ESG, that are going to probably affect and impact the way energy markets operate in the future, in reality, the other side of the coin is as well climate change, and in that, Latin America has had a role to play in the current crisis. Because while the current crisis was really more about a perfect storm of many things that were occurring both in Europe and in Asia and in the US as well, the fact is that it also underscored the impact of climate change, particularly in hydroelectric generation, because Brazil, which is one of the most has one of the highest dependencies in terms of electricity generation on hydro, experienced one of the worst drought it has experienced in the last 90 years. And so that what that meant for the national global gas dynamics is that LNG imports into Latin America, but specifically into Brazil, played somewhat or accentuated an already ongoing crisis because it diverted some of the LNG that would have been available to go to Europe or Asia. And the calculations from the Energy Information Administration is that about 20% of LNG exports from the US actually went to Latin America. And so Brazil, which, really LNG is not really a very important part of electricity generation. In the case of Brazil, most of it is produced internally or imported from Bolivia in the form of pipeline exports. It ended up significantly using its LNG export capacity, which had been built over the years. And it's just underscoring that we're entering not only a much more difficult period for global energy markets and energy prices, but also a much more challenging environment for electricity generation and energy supply within our own borders. And this is something that is not new. The region has been, I think, working towards increasing the role of natural gas in the energy matrix, in part because these issues about droughts have been plaguing the Latin America for a while. These are not new issues. But the fact of the matter is that consumption in Latin America in the last 10 years has grown per annum by 2%, while production has grown by 1%, if not less. And so, this has meant that now Latin America represents a growing share of the natural gas market, either from LNG or from pipeline. It's something that I think policymakers and business actors in these markets have now to couple with and to deal with.
Lisa, this is very interesting. And indeed, Colombia experienced their own nightmare with droughts many years ago and changed the industry in the country. And maybe Jaime, you can help us understand a little bit around the issues that Luisa brought, the increasing production of natural gas as a need as the demand increases in our region. What do you think about this? Does Ecopetrol plan to increase natural gas production? We also know that inflation within the industry is increasing, right, within the energy industry. And how do you think this will affect investments plans and the competitiveness of energy suppliers?
Thank you, Nimia. Pleasure to be here and pleasure to be with the panelists and everybody who's attending. I guess there's a lot to say about this, because when you think about what we're calling energy crisis, I think a lot of this is about the kind of consequences of the COVID interventions made around the world, right? A lot of underinvestment around the world in different supply chains, a lot of bottlenecks that I think are in a way a demand that was kind of repressed, if you will, over the last 2 years. And all of that is occurring in the context, I think, of an energy transition that's going to bring volatility for years to come, right? It's going to be a push and pull as the world adapts kind of to the changing investment climate associated to decarbonization. So all of that is the big picture. And when we're kind of sitting in Colombia and looking a little bit more broadly in Latin America, Colombia's position is kind of comfortable in a way that when you think about our energy matrix, about 70% of it, or if not more, 75%, is is renewable already because of our hydroelectric capacity. Having said that, the stability of the system clearly depends on a consistent gas supply, right? That's what brings stability when you have spikes, and then that's why you need to have some form of optionality to import when climate circumstances are such where you cannot depend on hydro. So in that context, clearly gas is critical. We play big on gas. We want to grow gas offer. Actually, we want to grow the gas offer in country and in other places where we operate. And the fundamentals behind that, I think there's an element around grid stability, but more broadly, clearly we see gas as an energy transition fuel. We are in that place. It's a bridge, if you will, between diesel and gasoline in certain markets and new solutions that are going to come later, probably in an electrified world, right? But in many of the markets in where we operate, we believe that we're going to have some form of solution that allows scale, that allows accessibility, and that allows prices that are acceptable for those regional economies. And for us, that's gas. So we want to grow gas supply over the next 10 years. We actually have a goal right now. Gas probably represents about 17% of our offer, if you will, when you think about our overall production. And we want to grow that to 35% in 10 years' time. So we basically want to double the gas offer in that period. The other big component of this for us is the social impact of gas. When you look at the economies that we have in Latin America, and when you look particularly in Colombia, for instance, as an example, whilst gas has been, you would argue that it has been massified, it has a significant penetration, there's still about probably 5 million homes out there that do not get consistent gas supply. Some are getting it through pipes, some do not get it. We actually have 1 million homes that do not have access to gas, and their alternative supply is basically wood, right? They're actually burning wood to cook, right? With all the implications that has. So I think gas also plays a big role in terms of our ESG strategy and our ESG impact. So a lot there, but clearly directionally, gas is a big play for us. And I guess, with regards to sector inflation, it's tied hand in hand with this. The underinvestment that occurred over 12 months, when the economy slowed down and kind of came down to a halt is now, and the underinvestment that we had in energy supply chains in particular, it has now translated to all these bottlenecks that we're seeing everywhere, right? And we're seeing it in the oil and gas supply chain. We're now in the transmission business big time. We with the ISA transaction that we made, we're the largest transmission company in Latin America, and we're seeing bottlenecks there as well. And it's something that you're going to see in multiple sectors, and it's something that's here to stay probably over the next 24 months.
Interesting, and this is going to continue to affect prices, right? So it's very interesting. Jaime, thank you. Alejandro, maybe if we can ask you, in the case of YPF, what does the current energy business environment impact the development of unconventionals, right? You have a lot of that in Argentina, particularly in Vaca Muerta. So what are your views there in terms of unconventionals?
Well, thank you, Nimia, and thank you all for participating. It's a pleasure for me to be here as part of this event. Clearly, as you have mentioned, we in Argentina, we have been blessed with Vaca Muerta, with a tremendous resource of shale gas and also oil. As people know, based on public estimates, Argentina holds the second largest resources in terms of shale gas in the world and the fourth largest in oil. And clearly, the challenge ahead of us is to efficiently develop those resources, and primarily within the energy transition that the world is undergoing. So basically doing in the most efficient way in terms of carbon emissions. But basically, in the context of the current energy crisis that the world is undergoing, Argentina has a history of being highly dependent on natural gas since the 70s, when big discoveries of natural gas took place in the Neuquén basin in Argentina. Our matrix has all along been very much dependent on natural gas. That's not a negative. That's actually a very positive fact, because that makes Argentina a very low carbon emission country, consuming almost nothing in terms of coal. Less than 1% of our energy matrix is based in coal. And between 50 and 60, depending on the year, of our energy matrix comes from natural gas. So the challenge that we have is, of course, to supply all that natural gas, particularly with the high seasonality that we have in terms of gas consumption in the country, with a difference of about 50 million cubic meters a day between summer and winter periods. So basically, what the country has been doing earlier this year, the government has put forward an auction for producers to supply natural gas under 4-year contracts. Basically, the market was lacking the right price signals for the natural gas resources to be developed. And that came through this auction put forward by the government that incentivized tremendous ramp up in activity. Basically, the market has increased production by about 30% in less than 3 months based on that auction, and demonstrated the ability for the Vaca Muerta gas to be efficiently put at work with an average price of $3.50 per million BTU. Producers, including YPF being almost 50% of this production increase, we managed to supply the natural gas that the country needed. Particularly assuming year-round demand, which is in the order of 120 million cubic meters per day, with a challenge that Argentina still has of supplying the differential peak demand for the winter. So that's where we are depending still on international prices. The good thing there is that we have a counter-seasonal effect with the North Hemisphere. The good thing is that today we are not being affected by the $30+ per million BTU that natural gas is trading at in the North Hemisphere. And but the question remains as to what's going to happen in the winter. Winter peak demand is still not being able to be supplied from Vaca Muerta, even though resources are plenty, over 300 trillion or over 300 TCF in resources in Vaca Muerta, with less than 2.4 TCF of demand per year in Argentina. So we have over 100 years of resources just in Vaca Muerta. The problem is that right now we have some bottlenecks in terms of natural gas pipelines to be able to further increase production out of Vaca Muerta to supply gas during winter time. So because of that, the country will still be dependent on natural gas imports from Bolivia and LNG during the winter time, and hopefully by the south winter, the current peak in natural gas prices worldwide will subside. But still, the country is already putting forward some new projects to provide and to construct new pipelines to be able to further increase production out of Vaca Muerta. And hopefully, in coming years, we will have that extra midstream capacity to be able to further supply our demand, the country's demand, with natural gas from Vaca Muerta. But all in all, I think it's what has been demonstrated is that natural gas can be efficiently extracted out of the Neuquén basin, out of Vaca Muerta, as I said, on an average price of $3.50 per million BTU. All producers managed to increase production by almost 20 million cubic meters a day. And that represents for Argentina a huge savings in terms of hard currency, right? Just assuming an average import price of $15 per million BTU on LNG, 20 million cubic meters per day. On a year basis, we present about $4 billion in imports, and so in hard currency for the country, and about $3 billion in fiscal savings for the government, which currently subsidizes where needed natural gas prices. So basically speaking, we do have the resources and we do have the opportunity down the road at the right time and with the right set of incentives to potentially think of an LNG plant to not only be able to supply our own needs, but also become a massive exporter of LNG for the rest of the world. So, but of course, as you can imagine, with the current macroeconomic environment in Argentina, this multi-billion and multi-year project, such as an LNG terminal, should probably take a few years to come, but the opportunity is there. And of course, we are doing the technical studies to be prepared for that. I'll stop there for a second.
No, thank you. Thank you, Alejandro. This is very helpful because it goes exactly, I mean, we are kind of coming around with what Luisa said, right? I mean, we need more. What are we doing to get more natural gas? So the opportunities are clearly there. Argentina is a major player. Colombia going forward with the investments. So this is great. So I'd like to ask Lourdes now. To chime in about Mexico, right? We have other factors affecting the future of the energy industry that I'd like you to help us understand. The Mexican government has proposed an energy reform that seeks to consolidate its control over the oil and gas and power sectors. And if approved by Congress, what do you think is going to be the implications if this reform is approved on the potential carbon transition in Mexico? Please.
First of all, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to join this panel this morning. I think your question is very good, Nimia, because I think as I hear with envy my Latin American colleagues, I would like to point out that in our region, politics and ideology is something that we can never put aside. Over the past decade, Mexico had been preparing to do a smooth energy transition. Diversifying is supply chain, it's a generation mix, really boosting renewables with important investments, particularly in wind and solar. We added up in 6 years over 12 gigawatts of solar and wind. And of course, we developed all the infrastructure to be big importers of cheap natural gas from Texas, given the fact that we were not quite developing our base. But the new administration, the López Obrador administration, which is not so new now, it's been in power for 3 years, has decided to transform the model, to go back to a model of import substitution, and more importantly, to have two monopolies that control the energy sector, in which the electricity generation basically is set in place to burn the fuel oil that Pemex produces in its refining process, in its, I must say, in its inefficient refining process. So the energy reform, constitutional energy reform that has been presented by the president to Congress, what it aims to do is, first of all, to return to this dual monopoly, to end with the electricity market and the produce market that we have on the hydrocarbon sector, but also to take on control of the energy transition. And I think this is very important to underline, because we are moving away from being able to take advantage of the strong renewable potential that Mexico has, not only in wind and solar, but also in geothermal, in mini hydro, etc., to go back to a model that is looking back into the 60s and the 70s of last century, because it's really about burning oil. It's not even about developing the natural gas or the shale resources that Mexico has. It's really about using oil and having oil as the motor of our development. So this, in terms of the energy transition, really setting us apart from the rest of the world, because we will be increasing our emissions significantly. not only our CO2 emissions, but also our NOx and our SO2 emissions, which have also a very high impact on the health of people. This has implications that go well beyond the energy sector, because as you know, most companies are moving and already have net zero commitments towards 2050. And it is very hard to imagine that companies will bring investment into Mexico and take advantage of our manufacturing base if we cannot provide cheap electricity prices and if we cannot provide a clean energy supply. So I would leave it at this. I hope that Congress would be able to look at the hard facts and look at what is happening in other parts of the world, including the Latin American region, to help us move in the right direction.
Well, thank you, Lourdes. This is amazing how Mexico is pulling away from the trend. Hopefully, this is going to be fixed, and we're going to go back to the major trend in the world. So, Luisa, I would like to go back to you, because volatile prices and climate change have made evident, right, that countries must employ an energy strategy consistent with sustainability, feasibility, and the fundamental public services. What kind of policies or incentives can countries implement to enhance energy security and guarantee sustainable access to energy, in your opinion?
Thank you, Nimia, for the question. If you allow me, I am going to answer it by touching upon some of the very relevant issues that my panelist peers brought to the discussion. The first that I would say is that, to me, the energy transition represents kind of a regime change, if you will, in the way we think about the energy markets and the way energy companies operate in it. And so I do think that issues like how do we increase resilience, not only of companies, of countries, given what was mentioned by Mr. Caballero in relation to the volatility that it should be expected now from energy markets. And so enhancing resilience, not only from the point of view of the energy transition, but also from the point of view of the impact of climate change on energy provision and energy markets and energy supply, and possibilities of more energy disruptions. And so these are things that now countries and companies need to think about in a way, in order to make them more fit with the risks that we're likely to face going forward. I also want to point out to the issue that while ESG pressures and energy transition pressures are coming hand in hand, they're not the same. And that is something that I think my colleague Lourdes highlighted. ESG is about the social license to operate, is that the oil and gas business in particular, and the energy sector more broadly, has to think now about how is it providing clean energy and access to energy to consumers. And in thinking how, in thinking about this social license to operate, it also means that, and again, these are not new concepts, but have been concepts that have been for a long time. But because of the science of climate change, we now have more awareness of the need to even if in the oil and gas sector, you do need to take care of CO2 emissions, you do need to take care of methane emissions, and so this is and I do think that that the financial sector, or some of the pressures that are coming from the financial sector, but the ESG and energy transition ecosystem is much more complex. This is an ecosystem that is being constructed by the United Nations under the Paris Climate Agreements. That is a treaty that most of the countries in the planet signed. It is also has to do with the signing of the Sustainability Development Goals that all of the UN members countries signed in 2015. So this is not new. It is a very complex ecosystem of multiple stakeholders, of which the financial sector is one of them. And so to me, whether you agree or not with the speed at which energy transition is occurring, that's something that we can discuss at another moment. But the fact is that it is a different way in which we need to now adjust. And in that light, I do believe that increasingly access to financing, I do believe that access to markets might be conditional upon not only the cost of energy, but the carbon intensity metrics of the products and the energies and the energy that you supply. And so we have to be cognizant that this is not yet happening, but increasingly, I do think that is something that countries and companies, particularly in Latin America, that is an oil-producing region, have to be mindful. And therefore, to me, it's a responsibility both of governments and of companies to understand the risks that they're facing and allow and implement all kinds of policies that will allow their countries and their companies, and therefore their citizens, to continue to have better and reliable access to energy. So, in thinking about increasing the resilience of your country and of your sector and provision of energy, you also have to think about not only increasing production, but also all of this conditions and limitations and changes that are taking place in the world around us. I do want to touch upon one of the other points that was mentioned, is that I think that, to me, this new way of thinking about energy markets means that it's very difficult or very costly to pursue strategies that have to do with energy nationalism, because in my view, sometimes that really is opposed to energy security. And what the energy transition really is about ensuring energy security, the best possible clean energy and cheapest energy for your citizens. And so, and in that, I do want to underscore the points made by my colleagues in the that have the very difficult job of being CFOs of national companies in Latin America. That, you know, one of the, I think, roles that Latin America needs to play is to underscore the importance of natural gas as a transitional fuel, because it is part of the strategy for energy security, energy reliability. The region can absolutely do this, and many of the companies in the region have already gone very far, or have committed to net zero, or to reducing methane and CO2 emissions. So there is a way to do this in a way that is consistent with ESG metrics and dynamics. But I do think, and I do want to stress, the importance of natural gas in the region. That is already one of the highest region in terms of renewable metrics. Electricity generation in the region, 60% comes from renewable. You don't get that, not even in the developed space. So that means that, as Mr. Caballero was saying, the region, what it needs to do is increase reliability and give it climate transition issues with hydroelectricity, and the fact that you have cyclicality or volatility. You need to provide reliability, both in terms of the risk on hydroelectricity and the risk of intermittent renewable electricity. So it is part of the energy matrix and the policy decisions that countries need to take. Thank you, Nimia.
Thank you, Luisa. So in that context, maybe Alejandro we can share with us the initiatives that YPF is carrying out to develop a more resilient business model in the face of changing market conditions. And we can maybe discuss access to capital as well as one of the hurdles in Argentina in particular. But what is the company's strategy to accompany the energy transition process and the commitments made in the fight against climate change? Could share your thoughts for us.
Sure, sure, Nimia, and I will take on some of the comments just made by Luisa. Clearly, sustainability issues are at the center of any strategic discussions that we currently have. Of course, you have to bear in mind the different situations of the different countries across the globe, right? Not all of us are at the same stage of development, and not all of us contribute to the same degree to GHG emissions. So clearly, as I was saying at the beginning, Argentina has a very healthy energy matrix on its own, with very high presence of natural gas already, over 50%. Also with a high proportion of hydroelectric power generation, and now also advancing renewables in the last few years, where solar and wind together represent about 15% of the total power generation these days. So all in all, when you look at that, Argentina represents less than 0.1% of total worldwide GHG emissions, while it represents about 0.5% of global GDP or global population. So clearly, our share and our proportion of contributions to the global greenhouse emissions, it's clearly low. But even then, as I said at the beginning, we are blessed with huge and very efficient natural resources. So there is a tremendous opportunity for the country to continue improving the penetration of wind and solar. But of course, that has to be done in a sustainable way, also from an economic standpoint, and accompanying evolving demand as well. So while we do that, we do have our energy transition arm through our subsidiary YPF Luz, which is a joint venture together with GE, where we have 75% of that company. That is our arm for power generation. And we are already through that company, we are the second largest generator of renewable energy in the country through wind farms. We are also looking at moving forward potentially in the near future with a solar project. So that is primarily on going into new energies, but also, and as was said at the beginning, this is a region that needs to monetize its hydrocarbon resources, particularly in Argentina. As I said at the beginning, we have huge hydrocarbon resources, and of course, we need to monetize that for the benefit of our company, all of our stakeholders, and also for the benefit of the country to generate the hard currency that the central bank so much needs. So in that sense, we are committed, and we are constantly looking at ways of decarbonizing our barrels as much as possible. So we have already achieved a target reduction of 10% in GHG emissions that was set back in 2018. That was looking for a 10% reduction in GHG emissions by 2023 when compared to 2017. We are already at that stage, so we are already establishing new objectives, of course, more ambitious objectives on that front. And we are very seriously reducing all venting and flaring. Currently, right now, we are undergoing a 2-month project of methane detections, particularly over Vaca Muerta. That is a joint venture or a joint effort together with some other key producers in the area, of course, to detect and then look for ways to reduce that methane detection, that methane emission. And we have been also since for many years now have been using mobile liquefaction units to avoid methane emissions in some of our pilot projects in Vaca Muerta, and right now about to put forward a pilot project for crypto mining to make good use of associated gas in some of our pilot projects in Vaca Muerta, where we don't have a network to efficiently collect and commercialize that natural gas. So all in all, it's a 2-pillar strategy. On the one hand, reducing the carbon emissions related to our barrels produced, and then also transitioning into new energies through renewable energies, and also studying new opportunities, also using or taking advantage of great resources in Argentina, like lithium. Argentina, together with Chile and Bolivia, holds one of the best and largest resources of lithium mineral across the world. Over 50% of the natural lithium resources worldwide are estimated to be in the lithium triangle, called in the north of Argentina, together with the north of Chile and Bolivia. So we are also looking at ways to efficiently extract that lithium in the future, also to contribute to the energy transition trend, helping to mobilize the storage, efficient storage for renewables. So different fronts where we are tackling the sustainability issues that are, of course, at the cornerstone of any strategic discussion. As you were asking also in terms of financing, what Luisa was saying, we are getting those constraints day in and day out. All of our financial counterparts, either being our bondholders or being our the financial entities that are our key banking relationships, all of them, of course, are putting the sustainability issue on the table. And so we, of course, not only because we want to be cleaner, but also because we have to do it to be able to continue to secure efficient financing down the road. Maybe the discussion in terms of energy transition and sustainability has become too emotional, in my view. It's like in the world, it has become too binary. It's either you are for or against climate change, and I think it's somewhere in the middle where we will find the right solution, where it's not that we are going to collapse hydrocarbon production all at once. Hydrocarbons are still representing more than 80% of total energy consumption worldwide, so it's not going to disappear overnight. So what we need to do is to make an efficient production of hydrocarbons, as I said at the beginning, reducing the carbon footprint as much as possible as we move along the energy transition.
Thank you, Alejandro. Very, very good. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So Jaime, it's your turn now. So how are Colombia's commitments to net zero affecting the business profile of Ecopetrol? We saw you guys buying ISA recently, but you do have, as Alejandro was mentioning, do have to balance, right? One side, the interests of shareholders and creditors, but also the agreements related to climate change on a macro level, locally in Colombia, but also globally. So what are the changes that you will be implementing as a business to ensure the long-term sustainability of Ecopetrol?
Thank you, Nina. Well, I'd start by saying that, the trends are unquestionable. When you see there's increasing alignment around the world that climate change needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed in a specific, tangible, and forceful way, and what we're seeing, it's actually an acceleration of that, right? I think as the conversation progresses in time, the new commitments around the topic and the expectations around the topic have accelerated in a massive way, and we can only expect more of that over the years to come. Clearly, there is a big debate around what constitutes a just transition, clearly, and there's many points of view around that. But I think the direction is one where it's about, I think there's clarity about where we need to go. It's about how do we get there, right? But I think the ambiguity that we might have had in the past is gone. And I think then the question for countries and for energy providers is, what's going to be my strategy around this, right? How can I play this game, and where do I want to put my bets, right? I think in a philosophical way, that's how we approach it. Clearly, there's going to be a graduality around this. This is not going to be, an overnight process, clearly, but to the extent that the direction is clear, we do need to make some bets. In that line, and actually using some of the language that some of you have already shared, in the Ecopetrol Group, we do kind of think a lot about how do we address two things. There's an element around resilience, quoting Luisa here, but there's also an opportunity involved. So it's not just about protecting value, it's also about capturing value, because there are new opportunities here. There is an opportunity to reinvent the company, and there is an opportunity to actually make value here, create value, as opposed to simply protect, historical positions. And that's how we're trying to address it, and to that extent, we have, I'd say there's three angles to our strategy. The first angle is around growth. We want to grow our energy offer to the region. We want to grow our energy offer because the energy demand will continue to go up. I was looking at the chat, and there is a fantastic question in the chat about, what about the consumption side? And I totally concur with that. We need to put the customer at the center of this conversation as well. And that's not happening, right? The conversation so far around the world is around, how can we curtail emissions? How can we make producers cleaner? How can we make industries cleaner? There's very little conversation about the education and the behavioral changes that consumers need to make, right? But that will come, that will come in time. It has to come. But I think on our end, we do believe that we do have a role to play in growing our sustainable offer. What does that mean? It means two angles, I think, on that. The first angle is the core business of oil and gas needs to be competitive and needs to be clean, right? What do I mean by competitive? If our business doesn't reach kind of break even, it's not economical, and we need to start shutting down fields, we're actually harming the economy. We're actually harming our customers, because cost of supply for them is going to come up, right? If we look at the Colombia example, and same thing happens in other countries, but if we look at the Colombia example, if you run the economics of importing supply versus own production, it's actually worse for the consumer. So in a way, your first responsibility is to make sure that the supply is there. Now, that doesn't mean open the tap indiscriminately. It means you need to work in parallel with eliminating flaring, for instance, establishing compensation schemes for the emissions, going into fields that actually have lower footprint, right? And those sort of things, in a way that your carbon footprint over the next decade is substantially lower than what it is right now. So I think that's kind of one angle. Gas plays a big role on this. When you compare gas, I know there's a big debate around methane emissions, but when you actually compare gas versus the alternative, which is diesel and gasoline, you're actually halving the carbon footprint, right? At least. So that's kind of one angle of growth. The other angle of growth is diversification. We believe that if you think on the long run, we do believe that oil and gas companies need to think about diversification. Oil and gas is not going to be here forever. We believe that. We have a role to play over the next 20 years, clearly, but beyond that role, it might diminish over time. It might diminish over time because of the trends that we're seeing towards electrification. And that puts you into how do you rethink your role in the value chain. So what are our bets? We have three or four big bets. One bet is transmission. That's why we got into ISA. We believe that we're going into a more electrified world. Electrification is a strong trend, no matter what's the source component. And if you want to have a decarbonized world, the transmission grid it will have to play a key role in adapting, in providing stability, in providing accessibility, and what have you. So that's why we did ISA. That's one angle. Other angles are hydrogen, carbon capture and storage in particular. Those two in particular. And there's a third, I'd say, early bet, which is around natural climate solutions. Things like carbon sinkholes, for instance, using the biodiversity that we have in Colombia to compensate for emissions in Colombia and elsewhere. So those are very early bets. These are things that you're kind of saying, let's grow this stuff, let's pilot this stuff to see into 10, 15 years time, where can that be? But we believe that it is part of the role, it is part of the strategy. The other component, so growth is first pillar, then second pillar is TESG. When we talk about ESG, we put a T on front of it because we believe that technology plays a key role. It's in the center of actually delivering material progress in ESG. So we have a full agenda around material items. What are our 3-4 kind of top items? Climate change, water management, a presence in territories where there's very little state presence, and biodiversity. Those are kind of 4 big components of our ESG strategy, and we're making some bets around on that end. And lastly, I think an important thing to say, all of this needs to happen with competitive returns, right? This is not about philanthropy, right? This is not about philanthropy. We are an NOC, that is true, and actually our first responsibility as an NOC is to give competitive returns, because to the extent that we can deliver competitive returns, you can actually ensure that you can continue to invest in the company, that you can attract other investors, that you can fund our programs, and you can attract capital from foreign investors. And with that, you can actually sustain, if not increase, the transfers that we make to the nation, right? Ecopetrol represents, give or take, 10% of the national budget in Colombia. So the way to sustain that contribution is providing returns that actually exceed your cost of capital. If you don't do that, you're actually destroying value. So all of this is portrayed in the context of attractive returns to the shareholder, including the majority shareholder. So that's kind of how we think about it.
Jaime, Alejandro, you guys are the warriors of the Middle Ages, right? Today. So it's a very, very tough job and have so many roles to play. And in these difficult scenarios, like you mentioned, Jaime, making bets. And I think that's exactly what you guys are doing, making bets, because nobody has the perfect solution for all this complexity and problems that we are living right now. So I really appreciate having guys like you, making the tough decisions for everybody else in the world. So really, really important. But so Lourdes, I'd like to end our panel today with you. And I'd like to take advantage of your experience as a previous Vice Ministry of Energy in Mexico in the previous administration, and ask you to please tell us how do you think that energy prices volatility impact plans related to carbon transition in our region? How will countries navigate this period between abandoning hydrocarbons and shifting to renewables only? We have major national oil companies in the region, doing all these bets and investments and making sure that they have competitive returns and have a very ample role in our countries in this context of energy transition. So what do you think? What is your view about also the winners and losers in the energy transition, please, if you could?
Yes, thank you very much, Anemia. And I'll try to build upon what Luisa, Jaime, and Alejandro have said. And I will bring again a little bit the experience of Mexico, because I would like to point out that during the negotiation of the Paris Agreement, Mexico was a champion. It was the only, at the time, the only emerging economy that had a climate change law. And it was really looking forward and making strong commitments to boost the energy transition. However, as it does happen in our region, politics tends to interfere. And as I mentioned in my first comments, we are seeing a significant backlash in Mexico, where we're really not only closing back into a monopoly model, but more importantly, we are blocking the deployment of renewable energies, and we're going to a model of basically based on oil consumption. And I like to really stress this because I hear the comment, the participation of our colleagues from the region. And of course, I'm highly enthusiastic about it. And I really hope that this is a path that is maintained. But I really want to raise the flag. And in this sense, to mention the fact that the energy transition is a process. And Luisa mentioned that it signals a regime change. And I think this is really one of the things we need to understand, that the energy transition, we put it the energy transition, that's the name we have for it, but it really entails a redesign of the economic model, of the balance of power, of the geopolitical map of the world, and it requires, and this is something that we often leave behind, it requires a redefinition of the social contract, because as you mentioned, there will be winners and losers. So right now, in the short run, with the high oil and gas prices, this will incentivize investments in E&P in our region, particularly in those countries that have the resources and that depend on these oil revenues for their budgets. And this is something that Alejandro did flag to. And of course, it makes it harder at times like this to even think of relinquishing the oil dependency. So it is also true that we will need oil and gas, that oil and gas will be part of our energy mix, at least for the next 30 years. But it is also very important that in our region, government, business, and society as a whole begin to plan into the medium term. What is this master plan to transition to a low carbon economy and to reap the benefits of this transformation? And I would talk briefly about four areas that we need to tackle. One is, of course, diversifying the power generation mix. And this is something that is already underway in most of our countries. It's about renewables, but I will really emphasize it's not only about wind and solar. Our region has huge potential in geothermal. There have been a lot of innovations in geothermal, making it much cheaper with 3D printing, helping produce equipments that are much lower than they used to be. There are new developments that are coming into play that will be used. And, I think this is an area to concentrate on. But also the whole issue of decarbonizing buildings, the net zero of houses, particularly for low income. And this is particularly important as we look at how to adapt to the extreme changes in climate that we have in our region. And here there is an important role for policy in terms of building codes. Also in industry, it's been talked a lot about ESG and the net zero commitments and all of that, but it's not only about the commitments that the big companies make, but how can we help SMEs to be part of this transformation and not leave them out? We need to make sure that SMEs can also have access to power supply that is clean and also have a fair certificate process. And finally, transportation, and we're talking a lot about the electric car, but also about all the new fuels that will come into play, and of course, the role that things like hydrogen can bring. Let me comment also briefly about the need to strengthen the governance over natural resources. And this is very important, particularly for the mining sector. And Alejandro did touch upon the lithium resources that we have in our region. Mexico also has significant lithium resources. And this, of course, is something that our government, and I think this is one of the good points that López Obrador has about wanting to regulate lithium. I think it's important to regulate it in a way where we can have the investments to make sure that these new minerals that are needed for the energy transition can be used. But when we talk about all the new winners that are going to be in this industry, we need to think a lot about all those areas that will be highly hit by the transition. First of all, coal miners. I mean, Luisa was talking about the financial sector. And as you know, the financial sector has already stated that after 2030, there will be no investment in coal. So what do we do with coal regions? And this is a challenge that we have not only in Latin America, but we've seen it with the backlash in Poland, for instance, or in India. So we need to make sure that we have strategies to find a new purpose for areas that are fossil fuel producers. And this, of course, touches upon oil producing areas, like, for instance, in the state of Tabasco in Mexico, where our president comes from. What will they do if it's not oil production? It's not only about going into agricultural sector, but also maybe it can be an important renewable energy generation. What do you do with the workforce? This is very important also. And we've talked a lot about natural gas. Natural gas, of course, a transition fuel, but for how long? Will carbon capture and storage work? How do we transition from natural gas to natural gas for hydrogen production? How do we develop a view of natural gas that is not just saying we're halving the emissions for not burning fuel oil, but really using it for development? And last but not least, and I really want to stress this, it's the indigenous communities. It's having a transition that has to do with social justice. And I think it's not just about something that Luisa mentioned, the social license to operate. It is much more than that. We need to rethink the development model. We need to incorporate real benefits for the communities to help them flourish, to become energy self-sufficient, because the energy transition is taking place at the same time that we have the fourth industrial revolution underway, with microgrid systems for energy and internet connectivity, which will allow us to define a very different world for indigenous community, for local communities, and to really try to end poverty in our region. So to end, what I would say is we really need to think in terms of the new possibilities, not build the future grounded on our views from the past. Thank you.
Excellent, Lourdes. I'm thrilled. I'm going to pass the mic to Hansel because we are on top of the hour, but very thankful to be able to have this and listen to you guys. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.
And with that, I would like to thank Nimia, Jaime, Alejandro, Lourdes, and Luisa for a highly informative, comprehensive, and thought-provoking conversation. It has been like putting pieces of a puzzle together. I would also like to thank Chevron for sponsoring the program. And I do think that we have many questions that require further discussion, and we look forward to continuing the conversation with you. And with that, on behalf of the ASCOA, we thank you for participating today, and we wish you and your families a happy and healthy holiday season. Feliz Navidad, felices fiestas. Y nuevamente, muchísimas gracias a todos por haber compartido sus conocimientos y su tiempo tan valioso el día de hoy. Mil y mil gracias. Thank you very much.